Muted, caught myself immediately. That's great. There's been times when I've talked for like 20 minutes. Welcome back. Um, if you don't know me, I am Andrew. I work at Chroma Golem, a game studio focused on game development that uses the newest AI stuff in interesting ways. We're looking for emergent game mechanics and basically features in games that weren't possible before, like text generation, image generation were a thing. We do weekly dev streams every Tuesday, and the last few weeks, I think it's been about 3 or 4, we've been working on a little horror demo, and it has kind of been just a culmination of all the other demos where we've built dialogues with AI NPCs. This demo, we are focusing more on building a library that we can use in future demos, and our bigger game that we'll have more details about soon. Basically, we are thinking through how the UI should look for interacting with AI NPCs and like what sorts of features you want to include. We talked for like 3 hours a couple streams ago, just going over examples and looking at our previous demos and thinking about what looks good, what feels good, what doesn't. So if you're interested in all that, all of our previous streams are on our YouTube channel. It's a pretty long video, but if you want to just sit down and tune in for a while, feel free to. Last week we got back more towards coding. We built out a heads-up display for triggering these sorts of reusable modular conversations with NPCs, so we can reuse it for every NPC. We can set up like which NPC you're talking to as a prefab or like a scriptable object or something, pass it in, and then we reuse this HUD every time you trigger it whenever you talk to something. I'll show the demo that we're working on real soon. I just want to say this week we will be focused more on incorporating the state of the game into those AI prompts. So as players interact with things or progress through the game or basically make decisions in the game, you will want to be including that information in your prompts so the responses that they get feel a lot more tailored to them. In response to what they're doing. That's kind of the magic of AI. You can build like dialogue trees that are super dense and cover tons and tons of different options, but if you give the player the tools to kind of go their own way, do their own thing, it's really, really hard without some sort of text generation to cover all those edge cases. And unless you're incorporating all of the things that they're doing into your prompt, you're still not going to cover all those edge cases. So, yeah, that's kind of what we're going to be doing this year. I'll jump into the demo real fast. Let me walk you through what we have. Excuse the infinite screen. I am down to 1 monitor this week, but I've got a new monitor coming this weekend, so you'll see me looking over here. I've got chat on my laptop this week instead of second monitor, but I still see the chat. Feel free to pipe in with questions or comments or suggestions or whatever. I generally just talk and talk and talk and try and outline my thinking process. So, I'm not the most eloquent speaker, but I do what I can. And I enjoy coding, so I've got a lot to talk about. We will jump right in. Let me close this HUD real fast. I will say it's very, very ugly. We haven't done styling yet. We want to build out a more reusable way to style it because we're going to put this in an asset that we can import into all of our games. We don't want to have to style it once and just restyle it every time. We want to be able to set up that styling. But let me jump into this demo. I'll walk you through it briefly, kind of what we're building here. And I hope it's not too dark for you, but basically, it's a first-person horror game that is focused on conversation rather than like shooting zombies or even like much exploration. It's intended to be kind of a psychological horror. Basically, you wake up in this room. It's very dark. You've got a couple lights. You can peruse through the room. You'll see my cursor on screen. I normally have it locked, so you don't see that, but for now it's unlocked while we're working on the HUD. But there's this locked door here. You've got a camera up here you can see. The lights will flicker sometimes and turn off. That's kind of some of the inputs that we can allow the AI to interact with the world in such a way. While you're talking, we have some AI systems built in to kind of analyze what your fears might be, and if one of them is like the dark, if you say you're afraid of the dark, or when the light turns off, if you like run back over here, or allude to something that might mean that you aren't really comfortable in the dark, we can give the AI the tools to manipulate this world in different ways. And one of them is flicking the lights off more frequently or for longer durations, or like moving things around when the light is off, or playing sounds when the light goes off. Like lots of different small things that we can kind of piece together to make this world more responsive to what it knows about you, the player. But basically, gameplay-wise, you wake up in this really small room. We'll have a very, very short tutorial of how to like walk around, look around and stuff, but that'll lead you to come pick up this lighter, and that gives you a little bit better lighting, but you kind of have to stay close to these walls to be able to see stuff while the light's off. Eventually you'll find this like trolley over here you can push out of the way, and there's a vent in the wall. So you are locked in this room. There's also somebody locked in the room next over. So what you'll see when this light turns back on is when you interact with the air vent, the end game reason for progression here is that the light will pass through the air vent, and the person on the other side will see that and be like, whoa, I haven't seen a person in so long. This must be the person who captured me. I don't know what they're doing. They've got a light over there. So you're going to enter in a conversation with them, and your first task is to convince them that you aren't a threat to them. Like, you're not the person who locked them up. You're also locked up in a room. We have this sort of, again, very ugly conversation system that we built last week that lets you write your own custom messages, but also will take the conversation as a whole so far and generate some suggested responses. So we found that about 3 suggested responses and being able to write your own is a really good balance for people who want to keep progressing through the game. If they don't really have something that they think is interesting enough to write a message, they're usually not going to write a message. You're just going to close your game unless you give them some options of what to say. I'm seeing a bug here where our placeholder message is being sent if you don't type a message originally. We'll fix that probably first up. Easy fix. But we can give the NPC a personality. So here it's just a placeholder personality where they rhyme. And you can click messages, carry on through the conversation. If you get inspired and want to write your own, you can say your own message. I see another error here, or another bug where we press E to inspect the air vent. We need to disable that while you have the HUD open, because while typing we pressed E again and it reopened the HUD. But let's send a message, and you can see that it will take what you've said into account in the conversation. So they're asking about debating, obviously. They're keeping their personality in line, they're rhyming. So you can keep the conversation flowing. You can take it however you want. But that's all well and good. Like, that's cool in that it incorporates the chat history into the dialogue and lets you take the conversation where you want. But what we will be building this week is these sliders over here, which will represent. I don't really have a good word for them yet. We're going to call them metrics for now, or like scores maybe. And they will represent either failure states or goal states for the conversation. We got a special appearance from Lucy back there. Basically, you can think of it as one of the previous demos that we built. It was a retro brawler where you beat people up on the street. As you beat people up, your heat score goes up, and as you're not beating people up, your heat score slowly falls. So when the police show up, they have a heat score built into the conversation that translates to how much they trust you, like how threatened they are. If you've been beating up tons and tons of people on the street, they're going to show up and you're going to have a huge heat score because the call will probably be like, this guy is just beating up everyone, that's crazy. Instead of a call where it's like, this guy beat up one person, you should probably come out and see what's going on. So that already starts to incorporate kind of the state of the game and the player's actions into the conversation as well. But you'll also see, for example, in that demo, each message you sent had an effect on each of the scores. That one only had your heat score. But if you were able to convince the police that you're innocent and maybe it was someone else or you're just here passing through, you saw the guy run that way, you'll see your heat score actually going down with each message that you send. But if you're giving them stories like, man, he really deserved it, or like, I'm actually a bird, I couldn't have beat anybody up, obviously they're not going to believe you. So lying to the cops makes your heat score go up, and the gated progression of the game relies on some thresholds at either end of the score. If your heat score goes down all the way and they trust you, they believe you that you're innocent, they let you free, you progress on to the next level, you can continue beating people up and kind of repeat this game loop. But if your heat score gets too high, they arrest you. So that's game over. That's kind of the balance in that game. We had a night-day cycle type of thing of you have retro brawling and then you have effectively conversational brawling. Each message you send is kind of like a back and forth of trying to get this score to go in a certain direction. And we don't have any of that in this demo. In this demo, all of the prompts to the LLMs is text-based. So it literally just takes all these messages and says, generate the next message. So in order to incorporate that, we're going to basically rewrite all of our prompts. We're going to do some extra, formatting of data, encoding the game state into probably a JSON blob that we can then pass through to the AI. Excuse me. We can pass that full JSON blob to the AI, and that can include the conversation history, but also things like how much this NPC on the other side of the wall trusts you, how threatened they feel, how believable you are. Like whatever metric or score you want to include in this conversation, you can have those as scored values, and every single message that we get back from the LLM, we can also have that adjust these values. And we'll have some UI later that cleans things up and kind of brings it all together, where if you hover over a message, you can see the actual effect that it had on each of the scores. We'll put some UI in for maybe a little skull over here and I don't know, a happy face over here, so you'll better know if this score specifically gets to the skull, you lose, or whatever the outcome is. Maybe you can hover over the skull and it'll have a little description of oh, you go to jail, or whatever the outcome is. And that can be an interesting way to open up different paths that the player could take depending on how they want to play. If you think about like maybe talking to a salesman in a RPG, if you open up a chat and you'll notice this placeholder down here for an inventory. We use that in a different demo for a hacking simulator. But in an RPG, you might drag in one of your items to talk to this merchant and say, hey, this is my item. What do you know about it? Or like, can you appraise it? Do you want to buy it? So you could have a score be like a numerical value of how much they will pay for it. And if you tell them like, oh yeah, I slayed a dragon with this sword and a god blessed it afterwards, you're telling them this grand story, you can see each message that you send like increases the value that they would pay for it. You can layer in complexity there where maybe this score down here is how much they believe you or how much they trust you. So if their trust in you is really low, if you're saying like, yeah, a literal god blessed this sword, it probably is going to have less of an effect up here. So you get kind of this like kind of easy to understand, hard to master type thing where you need to be balancing these scores in such a way that maybe you spend a few messages increasing your believability and then you hit them with something crazy to drive up the value, but that also maybe decreases a little bit of your believability because it's so wild. And maybe you have another score down here for like how much of a relationship you have with them or something else that might make sense in your game. Basically, you can, in this system that we're building, we want to be able to add 0 or more scores to NPCs. So every single NPC you talk to becomes kind of a mini game where you have these goals, win states, fail states, and your messages that you send adjust them, and you see the actual effect, like hovering over this gave you +5 believability, or this gave you +5 value in the item you're selling, or -5 friendship, or whatever it is. So if you think about like, if you apply this to maybe a farming sim like Stardew Valley or something, every NPC might have their friendship level with you, but they might also have like a romantic level with you, and they might also have like I don't know how much they would trust you with a secret. And so there's different approaches that you could take to each person. Maybe as a designer, if you think through the different scores a little more, you can come up with things that are more mutually exclusive. So in order to increase this one would have to decrease, so you kind of craft the relationship that you want with each NPC. Maybe you can incorporate more of a global score, like if for your romantic score here, you can talk to an NPC and increase your romantic score, but every other NPC's romantic score decreases, or something like that, where it's more of a choice for the player. We want to basically just build these tools. So we have a library at Chroma Golem. We're building a lot of different demos, but we're preparing for a larger game. We want this system in place that's very customizable and can react to whatever game or situation we're putting the player in. We're really big on reusability and building these tools so we can kind of move fast and lean on the AI to be able to build these larger games that we want to build that just like a few years ago, a couple guys would spend way longer building. That's kind of the high level gist of what we're building and what we're doing at our studio, exploring these AI tools to ease the dev process, unlock new features in games, make it more fun for players. And right now we're building these demos to find out if things like this is actually fun or if it's not. So if you're watching and you think it might be fun to have this more dynamic conversation, Please let me know if you think it wouldn't be fun. Also, please let me know, but maybe tell me why, so I can get a little better of a sense of why it might not be fun. We're basically just building the games that we think we would be fun right now, and then we're playing them and thinking, oh yeah, this part is fun, but we could kind of do without this other part. And then we're moving on to the next demo, taking what we learned and carrying on. And lastly, before we get into code, I will say if all this sounds exciting or interesting to you, we have a Discord that is the Chromagolem Discord. We just actually added 3D modeling as a bot to the server, so you can generate 3D models for your games. Last month we were working on a competitive typing game, which was really cool. I'm going to go back in maybe next week or maybe the week after. We're going to generate some models, rig them up, and add them to that game as kind of a crash course on how to generate assets and models for your games. So really, if you are interested in this, if you're a gamer, if you're a game dev or want to be a game dev, just the blah blah blah. The link to the Discord is in the description of our stream right now. And
with friends.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. That was loud. Just head on down, click there. You can pop on in. We'll say hi. Now we've got an infinite stream, so luckily I'm not echoing all the way down. But let's get into some code. So this is what we have, and we are going to incorporate the game state into these prompts that we're using. So the system that we've built so far has scriptable object prompts that we can pass in to the conversation controller, which is what triggers a conversation with an NPC. So we'll also have a scriptable object for personalities that we can create for each NPC. Because there's only 2 speakers in this demo, we probably won't build it in this demo, but that's kind of a placeholder that we'll use in the next one. The second speaker, spoiler alert, is the actual person who locked both of you in the room. So you'll need to talk to them later and do some stuff as well. But we have this conversation HUD that we've built that takes in prompts and uses those prompts to do different things. So we have one prompt that takes in the chat history and outputs the next message that whoever you're talking to says back to you. Excuse me. Hiccups. We have another prompt for taking in the chat history and generating a list of suggested responses that you could say. We will have another prompt that takes in the chat history and uses tools that we define in the game world to manipulate some of the game world settings, like how often the lights flash. Basically, that prompt will say, like, here's the chat history. Can you determine the player's fears? Or, like, can you determine some personality traits or questions that we should prompt the NPC to talk to them about so we can get more information? How do we want to, like, analyze what has been said? We're going to use AI for that and define some tools in the system message that the prompt output can say, okay, use this tool to adjust this value in the game, or use this tool to direct the generate response to chat history to ask about a certain thing. So we're kind of building this system of AI systems that are all working in tandem to really just like try and create this believable world of the player is trapped in this room. They don't know what they're doing, and as they talk to this NPC and the NPC is asking them about themselves, they're going to just make up a story, and they're going to say, I'm a school teacher from Iowa, and I just finished teaching class and I was on my way home and I crashed and then I woke up here. And that will get fed back into this like game world state that we're building. And so we will carry the conversation as if that is the actual personality of the player character, and we will create suggested responses as if that's the actual personality of the player character. And when they talk to the big bad boss who locked them in the room, he will generate more of a story of like, yeah, my student is in your class and you failed them, therefore that's why I locked you up. And then your goal will spin off of that, of like, you need to convince them that if you let them out, you'll tutor their kid or whatever it is. Like, that's obviously a very much a lot harder of a goal to hit. Is like, you've been locked in a room by a psycho. How do you convince them to let you out? But that's like the final goal in this demo, so it's going to be the hardest, of course. But that's going to use everything that you've said to this NPC that you've been talking to, and you're building up this narrative, this personality for the character that you are playing as, and it's going to incorporate all that into the actual plot and like response and goals. So I think that's really cool. I think that adds a lot of replayability, so you can kind of, if you played through once as the school teacher and you needed to convince this big bad guy to let you out, the win states of how you would do that is very, very different than if you played through the next time and you told this NPC over here, like, yeah, I'm actually a superhero, like, this room is blocking my powers and I don't know what's going on. Like, the big bad guy is probably then going to introduce himself as a supervillain, and or like the government or something that's completely different, and then you'll have completely different goals for how to get out and convince him to let you out of the room, which is the ultimate win state. But how you get there is just different every time you play, based on the personality that you give. And I think we're striking a good balance of kind of crafting this narrative from the breadcrumbs that you give through natural conversation, rather than giving the player or telling the player to like explicitly write out, I want to play a role-playing game where I am a superhero trapped in a room, or giving them a menu of like scenarios to pick from, of like the superhero scenario, the teacher scenario, the farmer scenario. Like, they get asked a simple single question, like, who are you? And they can be like, I don't know. And then the conversation progresses to like, oh, well, do you remember anything before when you got locked up? No, I just woke up here. That's crazy. I don't know anything. Okay, maybe you have amnesia or something. And then it takes this turn of you kind of give the AI more control over crafting your personality for you, and they can reveal it a little by little. And you, when this guy comes through and says, yeah, you have amnesia, but you're actually the worst person in the world and I'm the good guy, you're in jail. Um, it it's a really low effort on behalf of the player way to play the game you want to play. And that's kind of the tenet that we're going for with all these AI tools, is giving players the ability to play their own stories with really low effort. So they're going to theoretically craft the game that they want to play without even realizing it, because they're just going to do what they want to do. And if things react in turn at a high quality of a high bar of quality, as just kind of reactions, natural reactions to whatever they're wanting to do, they're going to put themselves in these boxes and find themselves against challenges that I think will be really rewarding. If they set up, I want to play this way, okay, here's a challenge, I've overcome that challenge, I built this, like, I solved this problem that is really interesting to me or relevant to me. As one last note, you know what? No, I think we can just get into code. I typically join this streaming Discord server, and I will just say streaming game dev at twitch.tv/Drusif. And I'm in here. If anybody wants to pop in, feel free to join the Discord. I do this every week, and let's roll. I've talked a long time, and I would love to just write some code. So let's just kind of start at where things begin. We trigger the conversation to happen on the conversation HUD's conversation controller start conversation method. So this is where we are setting up an initial message history. We probably want to move that into, we could have a like conversation prefab where we set all this up. That would probably also include the personality. It's hard coded for now just because we're building the HUD, we're moving fast. We will come back to this. This is where we set up like the person you're talking to rhymes. Like their personality is there. We have an initial message because we want generally the NPC to always talk first. So the user, when they start a conversation, already has a prompt of what to say or what to answer. We can go ahead and start generating those suggested responses for them. But when we have our generate and show suggested responses method, that probably doesn't actually need to change because it's just going to use our chat history. We don't need to incorporate the game state quite yet, but our actual coroutine to generate the AI's response to whatever the player says, that's what we want to include the game state, the metrics in, both sending it to the AI and also when we get back from the AI, we want to double check all those values and see if any have changed, update them back in the actual game state. So let's clean this code up a little bit. It's a little hard to jump into, but we'll go ahead and start. So add message to chat history. Let's go up a level. On our suggested responses controller, that's what we trigger when you click a button. So that's kind of the input of, or the channel into sending a message, regardless of where it comes from. It could come from the suggested responses, it could come from typing your own message. Eventually it could come from dragging an inventory item in, or like doing an action. We kind of have this single point of entry for we are sending a message to this conversation or to this NPC. So this also calls it when we get a response back from the AI, and we also add it to that conversation history. So that's why we have this sort of branching big boy here, because both players and AIs can add to the same conversation, and we do different things based on whether the AI just spoke. We generate suggested responses for the player to respond with, or if the player just spoke, we go and generate an AI response and add it back, and then obviously go back here. And we could also be adding system messages if like things are happening in the world. For example, if you have a timed system where after a minute like the lights go off or something, you could add in a system message of like the lights are off now, or the door is now unlocked, or whatever. And it doesn't necessarily show in the conversation log in the actual UI, this here, unless you explicitly opt into that. But it will be included in all that conversation history as just like an input to, if you have a system message that says the lights are off, future messages might mention something about the lights being off or something like that. But we're going way more explicit with our implementation this week of we're going to be building a JSON blob of the game state. Let's go ahead and just start mocking that out. We'll say private void build game state JSON blob. And we will be passing that into our prompt. So generate response to chat history is this prompt here. We will probably replace the chat history entirely with like a token for game state blob. And let's just go ahead and do that now. So instead of replacing that, we will say game state blob, and we'll build that in this function. Right, gotta return with string. We will return it as a string just because we're passing it in a request, but it'll be the format of JSON. So that will include, let's see, can we build it in JSON and then like convert it to a string when we return it? I think we have a JSON object. For the shader graph though, that's probably not what we want. Let's say that could be fine. I mean, that's kind of what we're doing for the prompt history already. Actually, this is not even valid JSON right here. But let's say can't remember the data type, if C# even has a JSON data type. So we're going to take a look at that real fast. Because I know you can serialize or deserialize it into other objects. We probably actually want to do that. So let's create a game state object. And that can live I guess it can live here for now. It's something that is probably unique to each game. Well, maybe not. The format or structure should stay the same. It's just the values that will be different. So we can come back to it with like interfaces or something for adding in those values. But maybe we just put a placeholder here for now for a like game state blob that will serialize and deserialize around. So let's call it actually a game state LLM blob. And that will include a list of our messages for a message history. So that'll basically just be a wrapper around the current system we have. This was using the chat history. Now it will actually just be a blob of, for example, message history, and then each message over and over. Kind of like that, yeah. Cool. So if we were to I'm curious if we, okay, yeah, that's fine. So the other things that we want to include are we're going to call them scores, I guess. And I think each one should probably also be its own serializable class. Let's say system of serializable. Because we're going to have a list of those as well, and we want them to show up in the inspector properly. So public class conversation score. And so that will have a string for the label, so friendliness, value, threat, whatever. We will have a public float min score, max score, and current score. I actually would love. Let me do this real fast. Well, yeah. It would be nice if, like, current score could default to the value of min score or something like this, but I don't think you can actually do that because it's compile time stuff. But that's fine. So we've got our conversation score. This is a good placeholder for it. We probably could make it a generic so we can define types, but I feel like it doesn't really make sense to have scores that aren't numeric at least, like, because you're going to be adding and subtracting to it with each message. You wouldn't want like a string value, and if you wanted like strictly integers, you can probably just cast or something. We can always come back and do like a type for the values, but I don't want to add that extra complexity right now while we're just getting stuff working. But let's go ahead and add a public list of conversation scores. Cool. We might actually wrap this to be like a conversation message, which also includes delta values on the individual scores. But let's see if we can get a quick prototype working with just these and getting everything serialized and deserialized properly, and then we can come back and adjust the logic a little bit. So basically, we need to be building our game state LLM blob up here. So state blob, and we will say our message history is message history, and we want these guys to come from actually the value up here as well. So our scores there. We could pull those like directly and build the string manually, but I think having this sort of just isolated class that only includes those makes it nice for serialization purposes. We don't have to mess around with like excluding all these other things that would be attempted to serialize. This whole class is probably not serializable because we have game objects and stuff, so we're not going to try and make it serializable. So we can just pull some of the data that we want from it and pass it in. And then here we can say, convert this to JSON, return that. So we should get this back. And it should be in the proper format. Let's go ahead and see if we can say, let's create a, let's just edit this prompt because we are going to be basically rewriting it to begin with. Because, yeah, the system message isn't going to work for what we need. So let's just say, please return the exact user prompt given. Give me one moment. Somebody is at my front door. Let me find out who that is. Be right back. Muted again. Sorry about that. That was just a package being delivered. Successfully achieved or acquired. Let's get back into this code. Where was I? So please return the exact user prompt given. So we just want to make sure that everything's looking good. Let's generate an example response, game state blob, obviously because we are not actually populating that when we run it. So let's instead just, it's the best way to get in, set us up a nice little tight loop to test this with. I mean, it's not super important that we actually test it, but it would be nice to have this in a state where we can test changes really fast. Right now, what we could do is just walk over, start the conversation, and send a message, and then that would build this game state blob. We should theoretically get it back as the AI response, and it would be displayed to us. So why don't we do that real fast? That's probably the fastest instead of rebuilding things and re-architecting. Let's say I'm caught up in a joyful climb. I'm caught up in a joyful climb. That is not correct though, because it's just a string and not the JSON blob we're looking for. Let's look back through, and I will say, don't mind these API keys. They're for our private API right now that is IP whitelisted, and I cycle the keys anyway after the stream, so please don't type those in, but let's see what we get. This one's the one that generates options. This generates a initial response. We got our options. We're generating a response to that. So this is what we actually sent, which looks correct. Probably because we're using GPT 3.5 Turbo here instead of 4 or 4 Turbo. 3.5 Turbo is really bad at following the system message, so it probably just ignored it and generated a response since this is a pretty standard format, like message history. But let's go ahead and let's switch this to 4. And let's try once more. Just see if we can get back that JSON response we're looking for. Hi. Okay. Something else. So it's just returning the exact So we are sending the full blob correctly. It's just not parsing on the way back. So let's take a look at that code. We pass that in, generating response. We can nix that debug. It's probably nice to clean up our debug each week so we know more what we're getting into. But when we get back, this should be our entire string back. So got response. Guess we cleared it when we saved, but this should be a JSON blob, I think, if it is doing what we want it to do. So let's actually say, I want to run through once more. I want to see what it prints for got response. What's up? Just getting through the day. A moment. Excuse me. Okay, so got response actually is just getting through the day. What's up with you? So let's adjust our system message because we are passing in this JSON blob, but we're not getting a JSON blob back. The previous message exactly as it appears as a JSON object. This object should have the keys conversation history and what's the other one? Or message history and conversation scores. Cool. Let's try that once. So we're using GPT-4, which follows the message a little nicer. Our suggested responses are not showing up. Necessary data rewind wasn't possible. I have never seen that before in my life. I'm gonna actually Google that real fast because that's a weird error. It's probably one that if we tried again, it would go away. But post web request from C#, Unity. Something on the server side. Very hard to reproduce. For repeat calls, maybe. Yeah, we could literally just retry it in code. That's probably something we want to eventually do. We don't need to do that right now. We can literally just retry it here. Hopefully it starts working. Cool. Busy day. How about you? Can we get a JSON blob back? Cool, we do. And it has the full message history with the correct messages and no conversation scores. So let's incorporate those conversation scores. We want that on the conversation controller, which is where the setup for a particular conversation happens. Let's actually, just to clean things up, I want to move it out of the state block. Let's put it in more of a setup block. I guess configuration is fine. And hopefully our serialized object makes this editor look nice. That's fine. So we'll have, for this person, we will have trust, fear, and fright. No, that's literally the same thing. So we wake up in a room, we're talking to somebody through the vent who's very terrified of us. The goal is to convince them that we're not a threat to them, we're not the person who locked them up, we want them to trust us. And we want to calm them down. Those are the two goals, but is there like a third intermediary score that might have effects on how much they trust us and how afraid they are? Could have like friendliness. We don't really need a third one here, and we probably shouldn't have a third one. I just want to add in a third one for the demo for making sure that it can be n number of scores. So let's do something that's probably not going to change much. Let's say silliness, and let's give them all 0 to 10. We learned in Smack to the Future that you can do like 0 to 100, but it's a lot harder to control the magnitude of changes back from the AI. You can say like your changes should be 1 to 10 in value or something like that, but it doesn't always super listen to it. It more uses it as a guide of like most of them will, but some messages are way lower. But if you reduce the magnitude of all your numbers, it's a lot easier for the AI to just say like 1. It's not going to go like 0.5 or something. It's kind of the same thing as like rating books. If you think about like 0 to 5 stars or 0 to 10 stars, the 10-star rating has the equivalent of like half stars. But if you don't want people doing half stars, you just drop them down to 0 to 5 and say no half stars. And then it's a lot easier to say like, alright, 3 is average, 4 is above average, 5 is very good, and so on. It's more defined, fewer options, so it's less hand waviness, unlike me explaining this. Cool, so we have 3 scores here. Let's see if we include those now. Let's say silliness, we're going to start at an 8, or at a 3. Fear will start at an 8, and trust we will start at a 0. So let's run in, let's hit a message, let's see if we can get that game state back in our message. Ignore the actual text, we're just debugging it right now. Hey, I see somebody joined. We're printing out the game state back that we're getting. Yeah, so it looks good. We've got the whole message history included, but we also have these scores that we are adjusting with the values that we set up. Cool. And I'm just going to zoom in here, make sure that all 3 of them are right. So we have trust, current score is 0. We have fear. Go all the way into this message. We have fear that starts at 8. We have silliness that starts at 3. Great. So what we want to do now is adjust that prompt to be able to manipulate those values, and then when we get those manipulated values back, we will actually update them in the Game Worlds version as well. So we are passing them correctly in here. We're populating these tokens that we've built in our prompt with the game state that we're building. And now when we get a response back, it should be in the same format, so we can create a game state blob from it and then pull out the data that we want. So, say game state LLM blob state blob is equal to not that. We are generating it from the text that we get back from the AI, so it will populate the message history and the conversation scores values on that blob. And then we can pull out the actual message that was sent, so we can add that to the chat history instead of the full blob. We're going to leave this generated text for now, just so we can see the full blob as we're working. Oh, hey Tony, I see you joined. How's it going? I'm on one monitor this week. My monitor was delayed until Saturday, so I got chat over here on my laptop now, and I'm trying not to miss it. But what we can do is now update our scores, and for each of the scores in our state blob that we got back from the AI, we can go through our scores, compare the labels to see if they're the same. I guess that works instead of trying to do if statements on which score is which. Yeah, this is way better actually. And if the labels match up, we just update that scores value. We probably also want to clamp it to the min and max values. So we'll do that real fast. Now we're regretting deleting all those curly braces because you can't have curly braces on the inside, that's madness. And we will say mathf.clamp score, score.min value, and score.max. Actually, we want to pull score to update. That's our real one because we don't want the AI to be able to manipulate the min and max values. Min score, score to update, max score. So now when we get back our array of score updates, we will clamp it to the min and max that we defined, and then we will update it to whatever the AI has decided it is now. So we'll probably move this into a nicer method, which should move the sliders, probably set up hover effects on the message with plus and minus visuals of what score got updated. So why don't we start with a method for private void update score visuals, and that can take in a score object, I guess. Yeah, why not? And the other piece of the puzzle that we haven't done yet is at the initialization of this conversation, we want to be populating the scores box here. So why don't we do that first so we know how things are stored and have the references that we need and so on. So let's say in start conversation, before all of this, we want to set up conversation scores. Let's generate that real fast. And we will say for each scores, we want a prefab for the score display, which we should create. Let's rename this to scores container, since we've decided on a name finally. And we'll call these score displays. So this guy will become a prefab, but let's style him a little bit. We've got our slider, which maybe let's leave the styling to one big push of its own. But score display, middle center looks good. We probably don't need to force the expansion of heights. Yeah, that looks way better. And yeah, if you get more and more, they scale properly. Eventually we should make that a scroll box, but I don't think we'll have any games anytime soon that have this many different score metrics that we're managing. So if you have like up to 6 or so, it looks great. 7's starting to get pretty confusing. You can do probably 10. Yeah, 10. But I would say most of the time you're either going to have 1 or 2 probably, maybe 3. That's the 3 most common, I would say. So I just want to make sure they look good for that. Let's create our score display prefab. And let's go ahead and set that in our prefabs block. And that will be a prefab score display. which we can drag in there, and then when we're setting up our conversation scores, we can clear out the scores container, which I guess we also want a reference to. And that looks great. Then for each of our scores, we'll instantiate a new score display prefab and stick it in that container. So this is much faster than writing it on my own. And yeah, we could do a script on the actual score display for managing like min and max, and that's probably the better style to do. So this giant script is doing fewer things, but for now we will not do that. We're just wanting to set it up real fast. We'll probably want to add a public list of scores. Let's say a dictionary actually. So a dictionary of conversation score to slider maybe, or score sliders, and we'll set that reference, but that'll mean down here when we are updating the score we can also grab that slider really easily and update its values as well. So let's say score display slider is what has the slider. So we'll say slider, score display object, get component and children. I guess that's fine. If it's probably, I mean, it's definitely slower than doing a game object.find slider and then get component slider. But it is less brittle if we were to like rename this. Wouldn't work if we add multiple sliders to a single score display. I don't think there's a case where we would do that, because we have this set up where we want each slider to have its own label and its own interface for adjusting it, so I think that's fine. So let's leave it like this, and we will update sliders min max current values. This is basically what we'll end up doing when we get the data back from the AI. And we also want to update the label for this display, which I guess that does the same. It's probably more likely that we'd have multiple TextMesh Pro objects in the display once we start styling. So I'm going to say transform.find label, and we'll get it directly. So that will go from this guy down to the child object called label, which we probably won't want to change the name of, and get this component directly instead of saying give me all the TextMesh components in the children of this, which I don't think the slider has one, but once we start adding more styling we might add some sort of object that has a text component. Let's move this down, keep that nice and separate. Is there anything else that we need to do here? I don't think so. Oh, we need to add this score to the dictionary, right. And I think we need to initialize the dictionary too. I don't know if it'll do it itself, but let's not and see if something breaks. So this will give us our slider. So now down here, when we get a response back, wherever it was, I need to reorder all these functions and get them all grouped properly. But we actually don't probably need to update the score visuals quite yet. It'd basically just be this block here. We can just say well, we don't, well, I'll just do that so I can complete the value line. We don't want to update the min and max. We do want to update the value from our current score that we just set. And this should give us the necessary slider. Obviously we want a little error handling around that, but I actually don't want that error handling right now because if the logic is correct, it shouldn't error, and I want an error if it's not correct, so I know. So let's go in and just check to see if the scores get initialized properly. We don't have anything in the prompts quite yet for, I think we're missing a reference probably. Yeah, the container. We don't have anything in the prompts quite yet for adjusting those scores, but we will add that next. So in the conversation HUD, we need the scores container set. So that's how we clear it out and also add prefabs to it. So did not work. No reference. What have we got? Okay, so our dictionary is probably just not initialized correctly. So let's, should that be in setting up conversation scores? Probably so, actually. Let's say conversation scores, or whatever the dictionary was called, score sliders. Yeah. So that's basically also clearing the dictionary whenever we set up new scores. And all this would work as well if you had a conversation going on where it was like a multi-part conversation, where in order to get to part 2 you needed a certain score to reach a certain threshold, and then you triggered something that added new scores that you need to manipulate, like can't think of a good example right now, but maybe talking to a merchant, you need to convince them that you're cool enough to sell you an item, and then once you've done that, you can then barter of like the price of that item. But you don't get to adjust that price until you've passed this first threshold, something like that. So let's see if things are set up now. I completely forgot what error we just fixed, so hopefully we actually fixed it. The text labels are not set up correctly. There are 3 of them, and they do have the correct values, 0, 8, 3, so that's good. But let's check the console for an error. None. Are we not setting the label? Oh, we aren't. Label.text. Geez, AI, if you already knew that, couldn't you have done it for me? Alright. Things are looking good. I don't expect these to change when we send messages, but, you know, let's just say, please trust me, I'm actually a doctor. Will that update the trust? Will that break everything? Cool, so it didn't update the trust, obviously. That's fine. That's kind of what we expected. I was just seeing if things would magically work. Unfortunately, they don't always magically work. Let's go ahead and get that working now. So, in our response to chat history, we now want, let's leave this for now. But we want to allow it to make changes to those scores. So let's update our thing here just to keep that format going. Let's do the magnitude properly. And so how do we want to store the delta values? we could add a delta here, like that would be updated from the message, or like every time we get a blub back. I don't think we want to do that. We could add another like conversation deltas object here that has the same sort of thing, but just a change value, like plus or minus 5 or whatever it is. But I think we want them to live on the actual messages, which we kind of alluded to earlier, talking about wrapping this with a conversation message object. So it would be something like this, but obviously commented, where the actual message history stores the changes to each score, so then you can, in the UI, go hover over a message and have the change highlighted in some way. So you can see a little bit better visually what exact output or change your messages have had on the goal versus just kind of floundering through the conversation. So I think we'll do that. So we want a new wrapper object here. Say public class conversation message. And we're kind of using conversation here to mean this like mini game effectively that we're creating of a conversation that incorporates these scores versus being just like a chat message, which the previous version that we built last week is just text in, text out, and we are working more with JSON in, JSON out, and pulling out the data that we need wherever we need it. So for our conversation message, we still want the underlying public chroma LLM service.chat message for the actual message itself. But we also want a list of scores with changes. So that would be like a public dictionary of changes. I vaguely remember C# or Unity having problems serializing dictionaries, but I think that was only when they were the top level, or maybe it was arrays, some sort of data structure that you would think you would be able to serialize properly. If it's a top level data type, it couldn't serialize it. And that's why I'm thinking it was arrays, because classes are literally just basically dictionaries. Let's knock this guy into the serializable class decorator. And so now let's rewrite our conversation to have a list of conversation messages instead of a list of chat messages. And I'm thinking out loud, we probably don't need these score changes sent back to the LLM each time. The benefit of doing that would be showing the LLM like examples of both the magnitude of changes that we want, like you wouldn't have, if you didn't send back the changes, you could have one message do a +1 and the next message be like plus 0.05, or the next one be plus 50 or something. Giving those examples of previous changes kind of shows the magnitude with examples of this message specifically had this effect, so the similar message should have a similar effect. But that does add at least a few more tokens. I'm not sure we're necessarily concerned about a lot of tokens other than just stripping them out when they're unnecessary. So I'm just trying to think through, are these necessary? That's a value to have them included, I think. Yeah, we'll work with that for now. So basically when we send our chat message history, wherever we build that, here, it'll just pull from our list of conversation messages instead of our list of messages. Is there anywhere else that we specifically need messages? I'm not sure. So our message history here, we just kind of change how it's built up because we're doing the same thing. It's just kind of wrapped around another object. I think what we can do is just start implementing it and see where the errors come. So let's make sure we have no errors to begin with. Cool, cool. And let's just YOLO. Our message history is now a list of conversation messages. Alright, let's just go down the file. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 6. Yeah, whatever. Doesn't matter. So now our new message history initialization is new list of conversation messages that we can make this simple. Raw messages here, and we say conversation history. Is it message history? Message history. We'll rename that once our errors are fixed, so we can use C#'s auto rename. Message history is equal to new list of conversation messages, and then for each one, we're just going to have blank values. So for long conversations, this is probably a very inefficient use of memory to be creating and destroying all these dictionaries all the time, especially dictionaries where you have objects as keys. Let's think this through. We're setting up our message history here. And this block will also change too because we want the initial messages to be set up on the actual conversation controller as well, I believe. So maybe we think through that a little bit and just say like let's say public prompt initial conversation. And so now we can say for each message in initial conversation dot message history, or yeah, I guess that only has a single system message and a single user message. That's fine. We can just say, so the message history is this blank list of conversation messages, and we'll add a system message where the message is our initial conversation dot system message. Well, we also need the role and content, I guess. This seems fine. Let's just do it like this. We don't need that initial conversation prompt. We'll come back to it at least to get this more customizable. message history will add the next one as well. And so within this is where we have role and content. And we can just build this from however we customize the personality and initial conversation. So our message history, why is this grayed out? Oh, can be simplified. Sure, that's fine. Cool, so that solves our first error of converting our list of chat messages to a list of conversation message objects. Basically just wrapping around what we previously had. Scroll on down, so here we are adding a message to the chat history for the role and the message. Let's come back to that because I think we might be able to use our new data structure and pass that around instead of working with these strings. Let's start from the bottom. Redraw messages from history. So message in the message history. Message dot message. That's unfortunate. Let's say message conversation message. And then this gets message and dot message. And so it's a little weird naming because our conversation message has both a message and information about that message. It's just weird to have message.message, but it's kind of the nomenclature there. Let's see. So here, it's the same. Are we still using this somewhere? We are for the suggested messages. Okay, that seems fine. Let's go ahead and just do the same then. And let's rename this as well to conversation message. And so here, it's because our blob is still using a list of chat messages, but I think we can now just replace that with a list of conversation messages. Because it's basically just pulling from this conversation controller anyway. Conversation message. So instead of this, we now have, that's not right, we now have message and we also have score changes, right? And they should be, maybe we do a string here in this dictionary for the label, because that's how we're kind of comparing them all. And I don't want to have to serialize the entire label min score, max score, current score in the conversation message history as well. So let's do a string there. And I'm sure we're using that a few places that we need to update, but we will find more errors as we go. This looks like a good format, I would say. One missing curly brace here, yeah. So we'll have multiple message objects, conversation messages in this message history array, and then we also have like a state of all the scores. And that's more of a cache at this point. We'll just be updating it after each message, but I think since we're storing these on the messages, we'll be able to effectively like roll back the conversation as far as you want and basically recalculate all these values. So if you wanted to jump back 5 messages and see message by message the changes, you would be able to. Cool. We got a couple more errors. Let's look at this. Our message history is conversation messages, but we are adding a chat message, so let's LLM dot chat message, send message, and so now this should autocomplete, I would imagine. So we got our message, we have score changes of string to float, empty. I guess we could just be passing null here. I don't know if it's better to do like null checks everywhere, or to just have the dictionaries initialized so we can fetch and add to them as needed. We're really only ever going to be adding or inserting to them once when we set the data, but we might be reading from them a lot. So it's probably better to have the null and just do a null check instead of fetching on an empty database, but only marginally so. It's probably not the biggest difference in performance. So I feel like, just for the sake of sanity, it's nicer to have the data structures already built in case you need them or expect to rely on them, versus if we do nulls right now and check them everywhere, we just have null checks all over the code, and later on we might expect it to not be null, and it's just messier, I think. I'll trade a little bit of performance for the cleaner code. So we are creating our new message in the chat history now. So now it includes the initial message and also the score changes, but we want the actual score changes instead of an empty dictionary here. So we're going to make this big change and say conversation message. And now we'll have to update everything that calls this, but also here we'll say message.message content, I believe. That's not right. What is message content? That's on the old one, I believe. This guy. Message content. Where did we even get message content from? Oh, it was the old, the parameter. I see. Okay. So here, we just want message dot content dot something. Conversation message has a message, and in that message is content. Message.message.content. So we're going to call this conversation message, and say conversation message dot message dot content. If that is empty, don't add it. Otherwise, we can probably just add conversation message, which already includes our score changes and our initial message. We will redraw the messages from history. We'll want to double check that that is pulling the message properly. Afterwards, we will scroll the chat history to the bottom. That stays the same. We want to check the speaker role of the new message added. So we will say conversation message.message.role for each of these, which is pretty ugly, but I want to come back and clean this up. This is screaming for like some polymorphism or something. But I don't want to make the code too complicated right off the bat. Let's say generate new response from the assistant and add any included system messages. Alright, so this is looking better. When we add the message to the chat history, if it's from the assistant, we're going to generate and show our responses. If it's also from the system, we'll generate and show our responses. If it's from the user, we are filling out our response prompt with the game state blob that we built, and then generating a response to the user's message. So let's just look at these two functions here, generate and show responses. This guy should build from the chat history. We are using .message.role and .message.content, so that's going to pull the conversation correctly. Here, we are getting string back, which should be the JSON blob format that we passed in. And what we will do is, instead of doing this manually, we want to pull the final message in the messages array. And I think we want to also double check that it is from the assistant. We don't want the AI to screw up and add messages that are tagged as from the player. So I think we'll start to see more and more of that in the code, like the clamping of the values and making sure that kind of those auxiliary values around what we're looking for don't change. So we'll say conversation message added message is equal to state blob dot message history. We want the last one, so we'll just say that and assume that there's at least one. We can add some error checking there too, but we do want to make sure that added message.role is always assistant. We don't want it to add on behalf of the player, and then we can add that message directly. So let's build our game state blob, extract the last message, and then update the scores. So actually, the scores that we update need to come from that message's score changes array instead of from the new conversation scores object we have. So let's say for each score in added message dot score changes, and that is a dictionary of strings to floats. So we want basically to find in the score sliders, which is a dictionary of conversation scores to sliders. Conversation scores have the label. We want to find the conversation score with a label equal to our scores label, which is the key. And we add that value. We want to make sure that it gets clamped properly. Clamp it. Yikes. That's not at all what we want. Let's just say score sliders. The reason it's doing that is because we just need to kind of cache that. Score index is that, right? Oh, it's a conversation score. And then we will be able to say that. So our score in the game is what gets grabbed. We update the slider value of our new score returned from the AI, which we'll call AI adjusted score. And then we just clamp that thing we just updated to our game scores, min score and max score, not our AI adjusted scores, min score and max score. Cool, so that should work. We do have a couple more errors to work through. This guy here now, right, we changed it from strings to floats. And this is just an initial conversation, so they're all empty. Unless we want to add some, but that'll be when we set up this initial conversation. So it's fine to have them empty now. There were no score changes. Although we could have the changes just be to whatever the initial scores are, but I think that's fine for now. Here, when you type in a message, we want to build that conversation message directly and add that to the chat history. So, thinking about that, we kind of have a off by one error of where these score changes are living, I think. Because if you look at, let's bring up a little notepad here. What do we got here? Hi, how are you? Bad, I hate you. So if this is a user message, system message, user message. Oh, I'm sorry. So right now we are storing the changes in score to what a user says on the message that's as a response to them. So this message here would probably decrease friendliness by 5 or whatever. But what we're storing right now is we pass this into the AI and we have it say calculate the changes in scores and also a response. So it's calculating a response and storing the changes in scores on that response. So I think that, that is fine. It's just kind of a logic, where would the player expect it to see? Is it, if you hover over this message and you see friendliness -5, you do know that that message was in response to what you said. And so the friendliness -5 is like combined with this message that they sent. You prompted them to say that, so like that's the deal. That's logical, I'd say. In that case, though, there will be no changes when you hover over this, because the changes to the scores only happen on the assistant responses. Is that weird? Is that fine? I'm not sure. If you hover over this and it does nothing, but you hover over the assistant ones, they have score changes. Is that better or worse than if we were to manipulate it to where it updates like your most recent message, if we calculate the AI's response of, oh, I'm sorry, and a friendliness -5 score, I think it might make sense to store it on the user's message because it's more of a direct relation, logically, of like, they wrote this and this was the response, the reaction. It's kind of separate from what the NPC says in response. So if you have this conversation and you're like, I want to build up friendliness, I want to see what effect friendliness, or what effect my messages have had on friendliness so far, and you're hovering over messages, you might have like friendliness +1 here, or you could have friendliness +1 here. You could have friendliness -5 here and friendliness -5 here. You probably don't want them duplicated in both places, because then you're kind of doubling up. That would be confusing, I would say. Could I ask for a second opinion here? Let's see here. Like, it's technically the same either way, it's just where do we want that data displayed? Where does it make sense? If you type a message, or you click an auto-suggested message, I feel like it just feels more like you have more agency, like your messages have more impact, they're doing more, when this is directly tied to your message versus like you wrote this and therefore you caused friendliness -5. They're very tightly connected versus you wrote this and the NPC happened to respond with this, yes, in response to what you said, but this and this are what's connected, and it's less of a exact response to your message. I'm leaning towards here, so it's a little bit more of a wonky code thing, but I think that's fine. I think this is clearer of the messages you send have direct impact on the scores that you are trying to manipulate. And the conversation happens, but the messages you send are your input into both the conversation and the scores. I'm mostly just thinking this through so much right now because it's going to be a bunch of extra code if we decide to put this back on the assistants where it's easiest to implement. But I think it makes the most sense to have it on the user messages. I think let's do it on the user messages. That seems good to me. So what we want to do is basically build exactly what we're doing. We're building that empty dictionary. And then when we get a response back from the AI, instead of storing the scores on the added message, we're going to get the previous message, the message from the user, and update the scores that were there. So it's more like, it's less clean of just like you are creating data and storing it somewhere. Now you're creating a placeholder for data, you're waiting, you're creating more data, and then you're going back and updating the old data. But I think that makes the most logical sense, so I think that's what we should do. Let's go ahead and create our empty conversation message. User message equal to blah blah blah. We do this, that's exactly correct. We add that in. And so now we have a delayed state of the score changes, which we are going to show in the UI. And so now we have an extra state here of, instead of previously, if you had this on the assistant message, for example, as soon as you had this message, you already knew the value that you would show on hover. So we didn't have to have this sort of intermediary loading state. Now, if you send this, we don't know this until the response is generated. So if you hover over this message, there's an extra state here of, I don't know, we're still figuring it out. And then, once this message is generated, we update this. So that might be a case where we actually do want the score changes to be null. So in the UI, if it's null, we display this. And if it has values, then we display those values. Because you can't differentiate, like the differentiation we need is if you were to send a message that didn't affect any scores, so you have this empty dictionary, that would be, that would be unfortunate because I feel like all messages should affect the conversation somehow, but maybe not in some games. So if you don't have that separate null state, if you just rely on, if there's no values, display this, it would display this forever if you were to send a message with no score changes. So I think we do, now that this is all working, we want to go back and add in that null state to account for the user message still loading. And we'll use that when we add those hover effects, but I think that will be the best. So let's double check that everything that we've done so far is working properly before we start adding nulls. I have to sneeze, so excuse me. Or not. This should be fine. I feel like we could play it right now, but I'm not actually sure what I expect the output to be. Maybe we just play it and see if we get any errors, but it's going to be hard to tell if it's correct. We do still have this bad boy, which we need to do. Right, we're calling add message to chat history from outside the script as well. So here we want to create a conversation message for this user message. And that's going to be message equal to, okay, so it doesn't know. Let's go ahead and just build it manually and say chroma LLM dot chat message that's that, and then we want conversation message that. Guess we could have some constructors instead of doing this all the time, but say score changes is equal to null. We'll go ahead and begin the conversion, and then that we add. So that looks correct. Creating a message of the suggested response. Trigger the response. I think we are doing that, obviously. So let's clean up that debug statement as well. Static on click. Oh, that was back from when we were trying to figure out the best way to set up click handlers. So let's just clean this up a little bit. let's head back to that conversation controller. We should have no more errors. I just want to click a few messages, see if something blows up. I don't think it'll be entirely correct, and I'm not entirely mad about it if it's not. So let's just say, in response to what's up, nothing, you. We'll probably get that JSON blob back, I would imagine, because we never updated that, but I just want to see if we get an error. Yeah, so we're going to be like serializing something incorrectly, I bet. So nothing you, that's weird, that's fine. Here we have added message is null, I believe. Just been quiet, how do you do? So that's our auto suggested responses. So we'll want to double check that as well. I'm sure we'll come back to here once we finish our null transition, but yeah, I wanna get that done, and then that'll be like the very baseline plumbing for this all, and then we can go through and hunt down all the bugs. So anywhere we create a conversation message, let's highlight those. But here, creating conversation messages for the initial messages. So those, if we think about the two states they can be in, here is no changes, and null is there might be changes, but we're still calculating them. We're not going to calculate any changes for these, so no changes is correct. Here, we aren't creating any new messages here, so we're just using the message that we've already created and adding it to the history, so this is fine. Here, we are creating a new message for the AI's response, and as we decided, the AI's response will not have any changes. We're only going to show it when you hover over user messages. So therefore, I would say that's another state of like, just don't show anything. But I think what we'll do in the UI is just say like, if it's a user response and you hover over it, then trigger the score changes tooltip or whatever it is. If it's an assistant or a system message, don't show it. So I think what we can do is just treat this as friendliness 0. No changes to anything. So instead of having null, which would mean like we're calculating changes, we will have the empty dictionary there as well of no changes. All the changes are on the user messages. You could potentially add changes if you wanted, like maybe an AI goes crazy and just all of a sudden they make changes to the scores. Like that could add some interesting challenges. You have to like manage more than your inputs, like they're affecting stuff as well. Maybe they're really mad at you and they are like intentionally tanking the friendliness or something. But I think for the baseline library, let's just say all assistant messages have no changes to the scores. Just user messages will change the scores. So here, we create that added message. We're getting it back from the message history. Sure feels like this might be a little wrong. I think this is actually the error we just saw, but I'll come back to that because that should be, I mean, it should be correct because we're pulling from that message history array, but we'll see. We don't need to adjust the dictionary is what I'm getting at here. Here, we're not creating any conversation messages. Here we're not creating anything, we are just reading through them. And this is where we would say, like, if it's a user message, add the hover effect to show score changes from that message. So that's where we're instantiating the prefabs to display each message and setting up those triggers and stuff. Here, we are creating a user message from the actual player, and that's where our score changes needs to be null, because that means we are loading. We don't know yet the effect this message had. We will find out on the next response. So score changes is null. So there, and the suggested responses here are the two times we want score changes to be null, because those are the two times that we don't yet know what the score changes are. We're waiting for the AI response. So speaking of, on response, not that one, that's for suggested responses. On AI response generation complete, that's where we want to say, let's go find that previous user message and let's change its scores. But we do still want this most recent message to add to the chat history. But we want to say of the most recent user message, not this one, and say conversation message, most recent user message is equal to, that's not gonna be correct most of the time, but maybe it is. I would love to like reverse and filter, but I mean, yeah, that's not going to be correct because we also want to add later on, like if the user doesn't respond, we want to give NPCs timers where they can like add more messages and say like, hey, why aren't you answering me? That sort of stuff. So we can't guarantee that the penultimate message is the user message. So let's say message history dot find last. Nice. And then most recent user message. So we're getting our score changes off of the added AI message. And we're getting the AI adjusted score from it, but our score is going to be this guy's score changes. Well, this is updating the game's score, which we want to be doing. I think it's an additional operation we want to do that also updates that previous user message with the details that we want to be tracking so users can hover over it and show. So update the most recent user messages score changes dictionary, and that it should be null at this point, but we want to double check that. We'll say if most recent user message dot score changes is equal to null, then we will instantiate it and I'm just gonna jump over here real fast and say, is my audio loud enough, by the way? So if it's null, which means it's loading, then we are basically just instantiating it now so we can add values to it. So we'll say most recent user message score changes. We have string to float, so the string is the label, and the key here is the label as well for the JSON object we're getting back. And so here, we actually, let's just set it to this, which is the clamped value. Maybe let's just say float clamped value, a little cleaner. And we'll do this guy. We'll set that to clamped value. We'll set this to clamped value. We'll set everything to clamped value. And so compound assignment. Okay, that's fine. I kind of like that syntax if I understand what it does. Let's see here. So this should go back, and that user message should now have the score changes assigned to it instead of the most recent user message. Can we just say state_blob.last, .messagehistory.last, I think? Or does it have to be a filter? Last? Yeah, that seems fine. Cool. So that should be correct. Let's take a look. Thanks, Tony, by the way. Let's take a look. Can we see the message history? We can. The conversation message might not be serializable. It is. Oh, we can't visualize dictionaries in the inspector. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. We'll set up the UI displaying tooltips next, and we'll be able to visualize it that way. Let's clear all this out. Let's click some messages around and see if anything breaks, because I think we had an error earlier. What's up? Just a usual day, feeling okay. Let's see if we get a message back or an error. I would imagine an error, yeah. Just a usual day, feeling okay. That's sure. So added AI messages score changes is null. Is message history empty? So let's say got that many messages, exactly what I wanted. Let's run that again and we'll at least be able to see. It should say got like the total number of messages in the message history. I'm feeling like a star, you can't stop my shine. But I'm imagining it's going to say got 0 messages. Got 3 messages. Okay, so this is the message we're getting back. I hope this is large enough for the screen. But we're getting 3 messages, which is correct. We got our initial system and assistant messages. We have our user message. We have our conversation scores. This message history, though, is not including the scores. So how are we building that? Let's take a quick look at our generate responsive chat history. Building it from the game blob. Conversation scores, let's see what we've sent. I believe that's this guy. We did not send the score deltas in our messages. Are they not serializing correctly? Because message history is a list of conversation messages. We're sending this, but not this. Let's do that. Let's So I'm pretty sure it serializes just fine. It just can't be shown in the inspector. Will serialize correctly. Supports serializing dictionaries as long as the types, key and value, are serializable. They are. You save or load, the dictionary will be included. That's fine. However, please note that the serializing system has limitations. It cannot serialize certain types like list or dictionary of custom classes that don't implement serializable. That's fine, we're not doing that. Okay, let's take a look at the humans. Nothing came of that. This guy's comments are always such a quote joy to read. I mean, I don't think I need to add the attribute to, yeah, not the variables. Alright, serialized field. That's what I was thinking of. Let's see. You got any dictionaries in these examples? Serialized dictionary. Oof. I mean, we could just add it in. We might have to. I got tuples as well. Apparently they can't serialize tuples. Yeah, we might just have to add a serializable dictionary. Luckily, it's probably been implemented 10,000 times, so... Serializable dictionary, key, value. Do it for me, please. Keys, values. It's not exactly what I want. I think I want to inherit from... Well, does it recommend I inherit from a dictionary? Adds keys, values. I think this is just so you can see the keys and values in the inspector. I don't necessarily need all that. And it just builds it from the parallelized lists. I mean, I guess that's a good way to... That's probably how you implement it, actually. You just have these callbacks for the iSerialization callback receivers. On before serialize, you convert it to lists. On after serialize it, you convert it back. to a dictionary. Let's serializable dictionary. And yeah, that's going to be plenty of errors, I assume. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of changes for just checking to see if it works. Why don't we first see if serialized field magically makes it work, but I don't think it will. But if it does, that would be great because we don't have to go back and redo everything we've done 3 times now. Say serializable field, I would think it was. Serialized field. And might as well just add it to the other one as well. Then let's go send a message and see if we're sending it. And I guess we can output that conversation message after we built it as well. Score changes here will be null. Maybe that's why, actually, I mean, score changes is what was missing, right? So maybe that's, we'll trace through it again. When we get a response back, I want to build that message and print it out. So here, that should have zeros for changes. So let's say debug.log added AI message. We want to print the whole thing. I want like, yeah. We can just print the whole got response generated text. So we know we have enough messages. We are building our blob from that. I think let's just trace through. So got our messages. Let's send a custom message of hello. Go ahead and clear some of these other debugs while I'm in here. So we're not littering the console quite so much. Oh, that clears the console. Right, let's try this again. And let's not get distracted. What's in your cup? So generating a response to that, which correctly does not include the score deltas because they're nulls. But maybe we need to tell the prompt that the responses should have the score deltas. Or maybe we add zeros when we send it to the LLM so it sees the format. But we also don't want it to see like 0 is acceptable. We'll add it to the prompt. I think that's what we'll do. But here, yeah, so what we're getting back does not have any score changes because what we're sending it does not have any score changes. So we do want to say like if added AI message dot score changes is not equal to null, then do all this jazz. And we also want, if it is null, yo, this message had no score changes, but should have. Added AI message. Okay, so we shouldn't get an error now because we know that it's happening because we're not getting score changes back. If we do happen to get a message back that has no score changes, we're handling it, not getting an error. But we do need to tell the prompt that we need it to add score changes. So, you are a conversational AI for a video game that incorporates game state. The game state is represented as a JSON blob, and your response should be a modified version of that JSON blob. The JSON blob takes this format. So let's very quickly. I'm sure there's a keyboard shortcut for this in Visual Studio, but it's not highlighting it in Control/, which I would expect it to be. Alright, we got that. Let's pass that in. Takes this format. One, two, three, four. That's right. So this shows message history as is a key. Each message has a message component and a score changes component. That score changes matches in label to the conversation scores label down here. Let's go ahead and add a second one for trust 6. We just want to give it some examples of multiple so it knows that they have to match. And we want to show that one message can have effects on multiple scores. And then we will say user messages may not always, let's see. Ooh. So what's going to happen as we build out the message history is that it will start to see that user messages are the ones with score changes, and assistant messages don't have score changes because we're storing those on the user messages. So we want to say the score changes from the assistant message you create are stored on the previous user message. So you should always include a score changes object with your generated with the message you add to the because we don't want necessarily for it to generate the whole thing back. We can just have it generate this. Which would be a top level dictionary, which we can serialize into an object. Yeah, that's fine. With the message you create, your response should take the form of a single message in response to the full message history and follow and strictly follow the following JSON format. Assistant, let's also say a single message from the assistant in response to the full message history and strictly follow the following JSON format. I'm doing great, thanks for asking. And instead of politeness, let's say friendliness. And here, let's increase that by 5. Maybe this time we don't have 2. You know what, let's always include it. Let's say your score changes should include all, value should be the change or delta to the associated score, because it will be added to the existing game state score. Okay. So if we were to take this, put that in, generate an example response, will it give us a single message in response? Hello, I'm doing great, thank you for asking. How may I assist you today? Friendliness +2, trust 0. Okay, that seems good. So let's also just add a few extra things of like, your personality is blah blah blah. Don't mention you're an AI assistant. Do not mention you are AI. Your personality will be defined in the first user message, and you should always aim to completely personify that personality as given. Sure. Let's try that once more with this. We're not going to have the first user message with the personality quite yet. We'll insert that later. But now we have, hello, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. How can I assist you today? Friendliness +2, trust +1. Seems fine. Let's go ahead and put that game state blob back in. This all looks good. Oh, I forget I'm in play mode. I hope all this doesn't reset when I exit play mode. Okay, it doesn't with scriptable objects. Great. If you are a Unity developer, a great tip is to make your Unity editor turn bright red when you are in play mode. I forget exactly where that is. I think it's somewhere in the settings. But that is a great reminder of, hey, you're in play mode. Most of what you're doing, if you're playing in the editor, is going to reset when you leave play mode. So it's nice to have that visual reminder. I'm just going to take a quick look and see if I can find it. But you can look up where it's at. It's just a great tip. Lots of people do it. Would recommend for sure. Yeah, we'll do it another time. Maybe I'll do an editor tip stream sometime or something. Cool. So now what we can do is let's play. Let's see if we still get that error, because now we should start seeing the score changes in the responses. Just hanging out what's in your cup. In the mood for a good group, want to assemble a troop. Sequence contains no elements. Message history has nothing in it. Oh, right, because we're just generating a single response now. I think that's better than having the AI try and spit out the full message history. First of all, is going to exponentially grow in tokens. It only really needs to spit out the next message. And also there's so much stuff like setup wise, we'll probably add more keys for more like other game state that we want to include to just let it know like, hey, in the same way we're doing these conversation scores, hey, friendliness exists, here's the minimum and maximum, the current score, etc. We might also have like, hey, here's the plot points we've generated, or here's the things that we've learned the character is fearful of, or here's the questions that we want more information about. Things like that can all get put in, and we don't need to spit those back out. So let's update this on response generation complete. We're not generating the game state blob from the response anymore. We're generating a single conversation message. So let's update that to incorporate that. Instead, we say build our next conversation message from the text. We say conversation message AI added AI message. Is that right? Capital M. It's equal to JSON utility dot from JSON blah blah blah. So all that now just serializes properly. We don't have to extract the last message from the chat history, which is a little silly. We do still want to make sure that that role is set to assistant. That's something we don't want the AI to be able to update. So it's like a set in stone guard there. We get that message and we can just go ahead and add it to that message history. And then from that message, we take its scores generated. We take its scores generated and we add it to the previous user's message. However, we do want to do that and then clear out its scores before we add it to the chat history. Because we don't want, we're getting this all at once. We're getting this message and the score changes. We're taking these score changes, we're assigning it to the previous user message. We don't want this to also be stored. We want it to be friendliness 0 instead. So we'll just clear that out and say added AI message dot score changes is equal to new dictionary. Not null because we're not loading more. We want to just zero everything out. I mean, I guess we could store it just duplicated because we're only going to show it on user messages, but I think this is nicer. We're grabbing it, we're taking the scores off of it, and then we're clearing the scores and adding it to the chat history. So let's run that again. I mean, if it all works, we might even be able to see these start moving. So what's up? Well, I've been feeling blue. Let's make sure also that we're getting 3 scores, the 3 that we should be getting and not like some hard-coded in ones. Let's see. Yo's message had no score changes, that's concerning. Trust, fear, and silliness. Okay, those are the 3 that we should be getting. That's what we got back. We got a response of this. This message had no score changes, but should have. So is it not serializing correctly? Conversation message. Score changes is null. What we're going to do is add a breakpoint here. We'll attach it to Unity. Let's enable debugging. Exit the play. Let's make sure everything's set up. I want to be able to inspect this because we might have to go back to that serialized dictionary, serializable dictionary, I mean. And I guess I could just build it manually if I could serialize the dictionary itself, but it's kind of the same problem. Let's play. I would like to get this working. Just hanging around. Once we get a message back, it should drop us into the editor. Yes. Okay, so added AI message. Has the message, just here in town, feeling like a joyful clown. Message from assistant. Score changes is null. Generated text. Has score changes. So it's just not serializing correct, I think. So let's add the serializable dictionary. I think other than that, everything is working. We have everything in place. Once we do serialize it correctly, we are getting the changes, and we already have the code in place to update these scores. So I think what we'll see is, once we add this serializable dictionary, everything that we've been building should probably work. We'll see. I see I also have a couple more faces in the chat. Hello, welcome. We are just coding away on some data real quick. We are going to add this serializable dictionary to replace our dictionary that we are having trouble serializing. Hopefully that fixes our serialization issue. Let's say this is a serializable dictionary. Now we just need to go through and update all the places that we initialize that. So here, 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 and I think we had one over here. Maybe not. No. Alright, so we still have our breakpoint in place. We'll run through again. We will make sure it's serializing correct, I guess. Attach to Unity. Play. What's up? Not too great, and don't expect a rhyme. Okay, so added AI message has score changes now. They are all 0. Let's see if that's correct. It's not correct. Added AI message, score changes. Keys, doesn't have any keys or values. So it's just empty. Yet, I can see right here, score changes has strings and values. So we are doing string and float. I mean, it's probably not the fact that we're doing string and float versus string and integer. But at least we are serializing into something. It's just the data is not correct. So that does narrow the problem down into, it was a problem with serializing the dictionary. I'm guessing, since we generated the serializable dictionary with AI, it's probably just wrong. Let's go grab a Unity serializable dictionary and just see if that fixes it. Older versions of Unity are unable to directly serialize generic types, but we're not using an older one. Oh, I do recall people recommending creating a class inheriting from serializable dictionary of type. I mean, I guess we could do that. Score changes. I mean, I feel like we should just grab a serializable dictionary from humans and then just do whatever they recommend. So we at least know the code is correct. So they're doing very similar. Serializable tuple. Somebody says it works, that's good enough. Serializable key value pair. Serializable dictionary. Inherits from dictionary. The same interface we're using. This code looks different because it's using tuples rather than parallel arrays. But I think that's fine. I mean, that's probably better actually. Yeah, we don't want it in the generic namespace, I think. Just not have it in the namespace. And we'll skip the serializable key value pair unless, oh, it is using it. Okay. You know, let's grab this. Let's see if it solves our problem. So rather than our serializable dictionary here, we now have a serializable dictionary with tk value. The interfaces should all still be the same, so we shouldn't have any errors. It's just a different implementation. It's attached to Unity, exit, start playing. Oh, we do have errors. Oh, it's abstract. So we probably do have to create the child class. Is it abstract? Yeah, it is. Huh. So that's probably what we had to do with the old implementation, but you know, we'll just do it. I'm spending so much time trying to figure out ways to not have to do this, but public class serializable score changes. Yeah, we shouldn't have to do anything else, right? Does not implement abstract methods. Do I need key value pairs? I would love to not have to implement that myself. So that's what's abstract. Why is that abstract? This one's not abstract. Basically just implements a dictionary. Does it not inherit from dictionary at all? Oh, it does. Oh, an iDictionary. Huh. Don't know where iDictionary comes from. Might be C#. Um, you know, let's just... feel like I'm layering worse and worse code in. That's needs to be new. So those I just pasted in are probably not correct either. Where did we go? You and you. And then everybody up here, new. It's our breakpoint. You know, could work. I would love if it did. No errors at least. Living the dream. How about you? Okay, our added AI message, drum roll please, has a message. I'm as gleeful as a seagull with a chip bouncing on this rhyming trip. Also has a score changes, serializable score changes with nothing in it. So, alright, maybe we'll take this code from 11 years ago, but I'm going to take a restroom break real fast, think this through, and I will be back in just a minute or two. Be right back. Alrighty. Welcome back. Infinite Stream. Let's go. What we're going to do, since we've been streaming for about 3 hours now and we did the meat already, we're just getting some refactoring working now. We're going to try this guy's solution for a serializable dictionary. If it works, we will double check that everything works and make sure it all looks good. If it does not work, I will figure it out off stream. I'll do a little send off and I'll get you the solution next week when we stream. I don't want to just try a bunch of solutions and struggle for the next however long when I've already been streaming for 3 hours and did all the stuff we wanted to do. So it's no problem at all. Let's try this solution real fast. We've got a serializable dictionary from Vex. And it's a hefty boy with its very own prime number helper, probably for underlying array expansion. Let's kill this solution that we randomly copied and pasted. Let's paste this bad boy in. Let's get all the includes we need if necessary, but not seeing any errors quite yet. I think he said to create a child class of this. We'll double check that. Serializable score changes will be going away. He does say just create a serializable class of your own that inherits from it. So let's just go ahead and do that. And we'll call that serializable score changes string to float. And so all of our implementations should say the same. Y is debug. Oh, Unity Engine debug and System Diagnostics debug. Does he include diagnostics up here? He does. I wonder what for. That is fine. We can just Unity Engine debug stuff. You know, let's do the opposite. Let's take out diagnostics. Whatever's erroring, we will just add the diagnostics manually. System.diagnostics.debugger display. Okay. So now we have our new serializable dictionary that should work. We'll see. We are inheriting from it for a serializable score changes object, which is basically just a serializable dictionary of that type. We use that everywhere. Let's attach to Unity. Well, let's unattach first. Let's attach to Unity. Let's go back and run it one more time for the final question mark. Clear this out. We have no compilation errors. We run it. It'll drop us into the editor in a minute after it generates a response to something we've said. What's up? I'm feeling stuck. Aren't we all? Cool, so our added AI message is generated. It has a message. Oh dear, it sounds like you're stuck like a duck in muck. Don't worry, we can change this luck. Does it have score changes? It does not. Alright, so that's fine. Unity can't serialize dictionaries. So we have all these hacks to serialize dictionaries because dictionaries are a core data structure that many things need. We've tried a few hacks, they didn't work, and I'm just going to figure out the solution off stream. And I'll let you guys know what I find next week. Thank you for tuning in. It's been fun the last 3 hours or so. We did pretty much everything that we wanted to do. We didn't get the final adjustment of scores working just because of the serialization issue, but basically at the beginning we just had AI conversation with NPCs. We had custom messages you could write and suggested messages, and that just powered this conversation back and forth, very basic. But what we did was add these different scores or metrics for the conversation that kind of turn it into more of a mini game. You define them on the conversation, so you can stick this controller on NPCs or objects you interact with, and it'll trigger a HUD for a conversation when you interact with them, so they can each have their own scores that you're trying to adjust. Like merchants can have prices of items and friendliness, and random people on the street can have how much they trust you, and maybe you're praying to a weird ancient item, it can have like a how much it opens up to you or gives you magical power or whatever. Like you can adjust these scores per object. They are per conversation. And the cool thing that we added is those are all incorporated now into the game state that we build as an object and pass into the AI. So that is all incorporated into the AI's responses. If they trust you a lot, in this score, their messages will be more trustworthy. If they don't trust you, their messages will be less trustworthy. If they're afraid of you, their messages will be very fearful. If they're not afraid of you, it's fine. It's probably no change. If they're silly, they're going to be silly. And it works both ways. Every single message that you get back from the AI, you can have adjustments to these scores. So if you say like, hey, you can trust me, I work at the hospital, I'm a doctor, your parents vouched for me, and here's a letter of recommendation, that message itself can have +5 to trust, and that will go and update the actual trust score that you have with this NPC in the world. And yeah, so it's this back and forth. Your messages update the scores, and the scores then feed back into your messages, so you can guide this conversation very myriad of ways, and you can try and intimidate them a bunch so their fear goes up, and then maybe your other messages are you can convince them to do stuff without needing trust, or maybe you want to be really nice and you build up that trust and you convince them to do stuff even if they're very fearful. So kind of approaches each conversation, turning it into a minigame. We'll incorporate like win conditions, loss conditions, those sort of threshold triggers for states in another stream. But we made some pretty good progress towards incorporating game state into the actual AI engines that power conversations, which is way cooler than just having NPCs that respond to a single message or even the whole conversation history. Like, a lot of games just build this, and if you were to try and interact with a more like a deeper strategy, like it doesn't really feed back into the game itself. And so this is a system where the messages that you say have an impact on the actual game. We are going to add another AI system that looks at your messages and has tools to manipulate the world itself, so it'll be focused on detecting, like, if it thinks you are fearful of something, like the dark, it might turn the lights down lower, or turn them off, blink them off, or keep them off for longer than normal, or something like that. If it has questions about something, it can guide a conversation and say, like, here are things we want you to ask more questions about. So the messages that we get back from the NPC here will be like, hey, that sucks. Like, you know what helps me is I like to go sit in a dark corner. Does that help you? And then you can have that second AI system guiding the conversation to kind of intentionally get more information from the player about specific things that can then be fed back into the game world and manipulate the world and so on. So we're building this complex loop that has a lot of tendrils in every direction into the game state, and we want to keep it as light and effortless as we can for the player. They can just click messages and it continues the conversation, but while they do this, this whole persona of the character that they're playing is being created. Like, very first message, you are now a character that is feeling stuck, and the whole game will revolve. I mean, to be grandiose, the whole game will revolve around you feel stuck. That's a trait you have, and that will be forever remembered. So later on, if you say, like, I'm not feeling stuck anymore, that's character growth. Like, the NPCs will remember that you were feeling stuck, and now you're not. So something has changed. They have that sort of memory, so the conversations are going to be a lot more believable, fluid, more in depth, and they can adjust, like, the actual game world itself. So yeah, that's what we're building on this demo. It's a little horror demo. I think we probably have maybe a week or two more before it's all finished, because we're mostly just building these engine pieces right now, and then once this and a few other pieces are in place, we can hook them all together and it should all work. So if that sounds fun to you, feel free to follow this channel. I stream every Tuesday. I start at 1 p.m. PST. I do game development. The co-founder of my studio also is starting to do some streaming. We're also starting to stream some games. We're both huge gamers, love gaming all the time. So feel free to either follow here. We have the Discord linked in the description of this chat, or you can head on over to of this chat. If you just scroll on down and click this fancy link here, we got our Discord here. We got obviously all the socials. You can also head over to chromagolem.com. We've got all our socials down here. We got the Discord link as well here. So feel free to follow us. We're doing a lot of cool stuff. We also have a lot of cool free tools in the Discord server for you to use. We got brainstorming bots. We have image generation for free you can use. We are in an infinite stream right now. We just added a 3D model bot. So you just type, like, I want a knight, and it gives you some options, and you can upscale them and download them as FBX or Blend or OBJ or something, whatever you're using. Just lots of tools. We have Sages for generating code, getting feedback for Unreal, Unity, and Godot. So if you're a game developer or want to be a game developer, come on in. We'd love to have you. So thank you for joining me this week. I'm excited to get back to this. I've been doing more engine stuff and leaving this project for stream each week, so we'll probably pick up where we left off next week. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you guys next week. See ya.